Welcome, Biology 231, General Human Anatomy. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 1, the human body in orientation. Today's chapter is all about exploring what anatomy is all about. So anatomy is the study of structure. Of course, this course is General Human Anatomy. So for us, it's the study of the structure of the human body. Many of you will go on next semester to take human physiology. Human physiology, or simply physiology itself, is the study of function. Of course, next semester is going to be human physiology, so we are going to explore the function of the human body. As you will see throughout this semester, anatomy and physiology really go hand in hand. You cannot talk about one without the other. However, this semester, this is a pure anatomy course. Therefore, the majority of what we talk about is related to human anatomy. You cannot really talk about one without the other. So as we discuss primarily the anatomy of the human body, we will also bring into play some physiology behind the structures of the body. After all, anatomy and physiology go hand in hand. If you understand the structure of something, the structure will give you an insight as to its functionality, or in our case, physiology. So in order to appreciate anatomy, it is vital to understand some of the physiology that underlies these anatomical structures. Let's talk about some aspects of anatomy. Let's begin with gross anatomy. Gross anatomy is all about, if we can see it, we will study it. If you can see it with your bare eye or naked eye, we will study it. For example, components of the lung that we can see, we will study it. Components of the heart that we could see without instrumentation, I should say, we will study it. So gross anatomy is all about the study of anatomical structures, body components that we can see with our bare eye without the need for using some sort of instrumentation. Surface anatomy. Surface anatomy mainly relates to the study of anatomical structures within the surface of the body. Surface anatomy often referred to as landmarks. As we will see here shortly, the surface of our body is divided into major anatomical landmarks, which we are going to make use throughout the entire semester. So after today's lecture, there are several very important surface anatomy or landmarks that you need to know before next week, because we're going to make use of these anatomical landmarks to name various components of the body throughout the semester. Let's talk about systemic versus regional anatomy. Systemic versus regional anatomy is all about how are we going to study anatomy in a course. This semester we are going to take the systemic anatomy approach as we explore human anatomy. Systemic anatomy is all about examining one organ system at a time. And as we examine one organ system at a time, we will talk about the makeup of the organs. We will talk about the tissues found in that organ. We will talk about the cells found within the tissues of that organ. We will explore the various organ systems in the next couple of slides. But our approach this semester as we explore human anatomy is systemic anatomy, one organ system at a time. Now, when you go on to your majors, such as nursing courses, or if you're a medical student, you go into medical school, the approach they take when they examine anatomy is a regional anatomy approach. This approach looks at regions within the body and how the various organ systems are interconnected within that region. Of course, this is a general human anatomy. We are getting our feet wet with anatomy. So a regional anatomy approach is really more for a more specialized type of course. Microscopic anatomy. If we cannot see it with our bare eye, we need instrumentation. A microscope is an instrument that is used to amplify small anatomical structures. So when we view anatomical structures, tissues, cells under a microscope, we are amplifying them. We will look under a microscope, both in lecture as well as in lab, and we will examine microscopic anatomy, or we will examine small structures that you cannot see with your bare eye. And the last way in which we can gain a better appreciation of anatomy is comparative anatomy. Comparative, to begin with, without using anatomy here, but in biology, anything that has the word comparative, that means that we are going to explore that aspect of biology using non-human organisms, and we are going to compare whatever it is we're looking at by using several different organisms. For example, here in anatomy, more so in lab as opposed to lecture, we will use comparative anatomy to gain a better appreciation of our bodies. For example, we will examine a sheep brain. By comparing the anatomy of a sheep brain to the anatomy of a human brain, we gain a better appreciation of our brain anatomy. We will look at a cow heart. By comparing the anatomy of a cow heart to the anatomy of our human heart, we gain a better appreciation for, of course, the human heart, and so forth. So comparative anatomy is when we compare our anatomy to other non-human anatomical structures. And by looking at non-human anatomical structures, we gain a better appreciation of our own anatomy. The body itself is organized into different levels, beginning with the chemical level. Within the chemical level, we have atoms and molecules. In this course, we will not explore the chemical level. Next semester, when you take physiology, this is where we will explore the function of the human body, more so at the chemical and cellular level. So chemical level, atoms give rise to molecules, and then molecules come together to give rise to the cellular level. In biological systems, the cell, such as this one shown in this diagram, this is a smooth muscle cell. Cells are said to be the smallest units that are considered to be alive. Viruses are not alive, atoms are not alive, molecules are not alive. Tiny little components found inside of cells, similar to organs in our body called organelles, these too are not alive. In biological systems, the smallest unit that we consider to be alive is a cell. We will explore the concept of cells and we will talk about what they are in the next chapter. But in this example, we have a smooth muscle cell. This is a type of muscle. We have 3 types of muscle which we will explore here in a moment. Cells of similar function come together to give rise to the next level of organization, and this is the tissue level. So in this example, we have smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue is composed of smooth muscle cells. So cells of similar function come together to give rise to the tissue level of organization. And in a different chapter, we will explore the many tissues that we have in our body, and we will see the various cell types that come together to give rise to these tissues. The next level in which our body is organized is the organ level. This is where many different types of tissues come together and give rise to an organ. In this example, the organ that we are looking at is a blood vessel. Blood vessels are composed of various different types of tissue. So for example, on the outside, that's one tissue type. So this is a epithelial tissue, which we will explore what that means later on. In the middle, here in red, this is smooth muscle tissue, which we saw in the previous level. And on the inside, we have more epithelial tissue. So here's an example of where we have various tissue types coming together to give rise to an organ. And in this case, this organ is a blood vessel. The next level in which the body is organized is the organ system level. An organ system is composed of many organs. So organs coming together give rise to the organ system level. In this case, the organ system that we are looking at is the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system is composed of heart, blood vessels, and of course, blood inside of the blood vessels. And then organ systems come together to give rise to the next level of organization, which is the organism. And we have organ systems like in this case, cardiovascular system, digestive system, integumentary system, nervous system. Organ systems come together to give rise to the organism. As mentioned in the previous slide, as we examine anatomy throughout the semester, we are going to be looking at one organ system at a time. The first organ system that we will begin with is the integumentary system, which contains the largest organ in the body. By the way, does anyone know what the largest organ of the body is? That's right, the skin. The skin is the largest organ of the body, which the integumentary system contains that organ, which we will examine in a different chapter. So as we examine one organ system at a time through systemic anatomy, We will examine the organs found in that organ system. We will examine the tissues found within the organs of that organ system. And we will examine the cells found within those tissues of that organ system. We will not examine the chemical level this semester. We will examine the chemical level in physiology when we talk about how the body works. So in this course, we will examine anatomy by looking at one organ system at a time, and we will talk about each organ within the body all the way down to the cellular level. Let's examine the various organ systems that we are going to explore throughout the semester. Keep in mind that this is a brief overview of the organ systems that we have in our body and organ systems that we are going to be exploring throughout the semester. We are not going to go into details of these organ systems until we get to them in their respective chapter. So the first organ system that we are going to talk about this semester, which happens to be the first one in the slide, is the integumentary system. Major components of the integumentary system include the skin, our hair, and the nails. As mentioned previously, the largest organ of our body is found in this organ system, which is the skin. The major function of the skin is for protection. Our skin is considered to be our first line of defense. Another cool thing about skin is that it makes vitamin D. Synthesize. To synthesize means to make. Anyone know how the skin synthesizes vitamin D? That's right. When we go outside for a walk, for example, when the sun hits our skin reacts by making or synthesizing vitamin D. Vitamin D, as we will learn in a different chapter, is very important because vitamin D helps our digestive system absorb calcium. And calcium is a very important atom. And we're going to see throughout the semester how calcium plays a significant role in our body. The next organ system is the skeletal system. Major organs or components within the skeletal system: bones. Not shown here, also cartilage. The function of the skeletal system is to give our body some sort of structural support. Without bones, we would in essence be a big blob. No support, no structure, no organization. A cool thing about bones is that many of the bones produce blood cells. So many blood cells are produced within bones, and we have various types of blood cells which we will explore in the cardiovascular chapter. So all blood cells are made within bones. As mentioned in the integumentary system, calcium is a very important atom. Therefore, we need to store calcium whenever it becomes readily available. In other words, when we have plenty of it. Calcium is stored in bones. So bones, because they're primarily composed of calcium, or a lot of calcium for that matter, bones are considered to be our storage site for calcium. What do you think happens when we start running out of calcium? Where does the calcium that our body needs comes from? That's right, the bones. Bones get broken down in order to release calcium stores that our body needs. Well, the problem with that is, of course, when you break down the bone to extract calcium, the bones become weaker, easier to break. But it's better to break a bone than the heart all of a sudden stopping on us because we are running low on calcium. So calcium is stored in bones. The next organ system is the muscular system, composed of muscles. There are 3 different muscle types in this organ system. One of these 3 muscle types are shown here, and this is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle gets its name because it's associated with, that's right, our bones, the skeletal system. Skeletal muscle working together with bones gives rise to our ability to move around. Walk, run, swim, jumping jacks. You get the idea. So muscles, in particularly skeletal muscle working together with bones, gives rise to our ability to move around. But regardless of which muscle type we are looking at, all muscles are involved in some form of locomotion. For example, who can give me another name for or a different type of muscle other than skeletal muscle? That's right, cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle, where is it found? That's right, it's found in the heart. Cardiac muscle found in the heart. What is it moving? It is pushing blood through our blood vessels as the heart contracts. Anyone know the name of the 3rd type of muscle that we have in our body? That's right, smooth muscle. So the 3 types of muscles found in our body or the muscular system: skeletal muscle, which is shown here. Not shown here, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. Out of these 3 different muscle types, the only muscle that we have full control of is skeletal muscle. We do not have full conscious control of smooth or cardiac muscle. We will explore this more when we talk about muscles. The next organ system is the nervous system. Of course, in my opinion, this is the best organ system of the entire body. Not because I got a PhD in the nervous system. No, nothing to do with that, of course, right? Oh, no, heck no. The main reason why I say it's the best organ system is because the nervous system controls the entire body. It doesn't mean it's the most important organ system. All organ systems are important. The nervous system happens to control, synchronize everything in our body. Major organs include the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Our nervous system is capable of communicating with the rest of the body through the use of electricity. We will explore more about electricity within the nervous system and how it is used to control the various organs of the body in its respective chapter. And we will do so more in physiology. The next organ system is the endocrine system. In a similar fashion to the nervous system, the endocrine system also controls many of our body's organs. But one of the major differences between the endocrine system and the nervous system is that the endocrine system communicates with the various organs of the body through the use of chemical messengers known as hormones. So the various organs or glands within the endocrine system release hormones into the blood, which then target a respective organ, which causes that organ to change its functionality as a result of hormone release. So some of the organs found in the endocrine system, for example, some that we've heard about would be the pancreas, the adrenal glands located at the top of the kidneys, thyroid gland, pituitary gland. Of course, we have some organs that have dual functionality, such as the testes and ovaries. Not only are these organs a part of the endocrine system because they make and release hormones, but they're also part of a different organ system, and in this case, reproduction. The next organ system is the cardiovascular system, which we alluded to a little bit at the beginning of this lecture. The cardiovascular system, as we have seen already, is composed of the heart, blood vessels, and inside the blood vessels we have blood. Main function of the cardiovascular system is to transport nutrients, gases to the various organs, cells throughout the body in order for these organs and cells to do what it is that they are designed to do. The next organ system is the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system, as we will explore more so in physiology, works very closely with our blood vessels and blood to form what's known as the circulatory system. The lymphatic system, one of its major functions is to participate in immunity. In a similar fashion to the cardiovascular system, it is composed of vessels. We don't call these blood vessels, instead we call these lymphatic vessels. Within these lymphatic vessels, this is where we have cells such as white blood cells that defend our body just in case our first line of defense, which is what? That's right, the skin. Just in case the skin has an open wound, a pathogen lands on it, and now we become infected. Function in this case of our immune system, lymphatic system, is our second line of defense, and this is where white blood cells will literally begin one-to-one combat with the pathogen that entered. Components of the lymphatic system include some organs such as the spleen, lymphatic vessels. Within the lymphatic vessels, we have these swellings called lymph nodes and the red bone marrow. The next organ system is the respiratory system. Main function of this organ system is to bring oxygen in. How do we bring oxygen in? That's right, when we take a breath, when we inhale. That oxygen, as we will learn next semester in physiology, is used to make energy. The energy currency of our body is ATP. The problem is, as we make ATP using oxygen, we produce a toxic gas known as CO2, carbon dioxide. So our respiratory system is also involved in getting rid of carbon dioxide when we exhale, when we take a breath out. So when we inhale, we breathe in oxygen, which is used to make ATP. And when we exhale, we breathe out carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct of making ATP using oxygen. We will explore all of that more so in physiology. Major components, organs found in this organ system, of course, the lungs. We have the breathing tubes that bring the air into our lungs, beginning from the nose, the nasal cavity. Collectively, we'll just say breathing tubes for now. We will learn their exact names when we talk about them in the respiratory system. The next organ system is the digestive system, made of many organs. Main function of the digestive system is to allow us to bring food in, breaks the food down into tiny absorbable units that we in essence call nutrients. These nutrients or absorbable units are absorbed by the intestines, which are then transported into the blood, and the blood distributes these nutrients throughout the body through the use of the cardiovascular system. So some organs, major organs found in the digestive system, for example, this very long tube, the esophagus, stomach, intestines, which are small and large, and of course at the very end, the rectum, followed by the anus. Another organ found in the digestive system is this large organ, the liver. The liver is also considered a gland. We will talk about why in the digestive system lecture. But the liver is considered the largest gland, not the largest organ. Largest organ is what? That's right, the skin. But the largest gland is the liver. The next organ system is the urinary system. This is a simple organ system, but its physiology is quite interesting. Urinary system is composed of kidneys. The main function of the urinary system is to clean our blood. As toxins are released by cells, these toxins go into the blood, and these toxins are cleared from the blood through the urinary system. This all happens in the kidneys. Toxins from the kidneys then exit the kidneys through these long tubes known as ureters. These toxins are now called urine. Urine is stored in the urinary bladder and ultimately released through the urethra. So urinary system, the main function is to clean our blood. And the last organ system, the reproductive system. Of course, male versus female. Main function of the reproductive system, of course, is to produce offspring. Organs, major organs, for example, within the male versus female reproductive system, the major organ, really known as collectively as gonads. Gonads are primary reproductive organs, which make eggs and sperm. The male gonad, of course, testes. The female gonad, the ovary. Everything else considered to be accessory. We will explore this organ system more as our final chapter in anatomy. So those were the various organ systems that we are going to be exploring throughout the semester. Now let's change topics a little bit and let's talk about how the body is organized in general. The body is organized into two regions, two major regions, the axial region and the appendicular region. easiest way to remember which region contains what, it's by examining appendicular first. Appendicular, as you may have guessed it, stands for the appendages. Upper and lower appendages. The upper limbs and the lower limbs. So when we say upper limb, we are talking about this entire thing. This entire thing is not the arm. Most of us refer to the upper appendage as the arm, but no, the arm is really only from the shoulder to the elbow. That's it. From the elbow to the hand, this is the forearm. So collectively, the arm and the forearm is known as the upper appendage or the upper limb. The lower limb, as you may have guessed already, is essentially the leg. So when we say appendages, appendicular region, we are talking about the upper and the lower limbs. Everything else belongs to the axial region, such as the head, the neck, known as the cervical, trunk, in other words, thoracic, and abdominal region. So everything else that is not a part of the appendicular region is now part of the axial region. Let's examine some major anatomical landmarks, which is part of surface anatomy that we introduced early on in today's lecture. I don't want you to memorize everything in these 2 slides. What I do want you to do is take a look at the review questions, and within the review questions there is a section that contains the various surface anatomy or major landmarks that I want you to memorize before the end of this week. It is crucial, imperative, important to know these major anatomical landmarks because we are going to be naming many organs, components of organs, and so forth based on these major anatomical landmarks. Let me show you those. So this is the review questions for chapter 1. If we scroll towards the bottom, right here, describe the following, oh no, not this one, number 8, describe the following surface anatomy regions and locate them in the figure below. So these are the different organ or major anatomical regions that I want you to identify, and these are going to be very important throughout the semester. So for example, the femoral region. The femoral region, of course, is the thigh, which is located here. The acromial region, the acromion, which is going to be found, well, I can't really do it here, but only know these regions here described under number 8. Let me go back to our PowerPoint. So only know those. Don't memorize everything in these slides. So remember, these are major anatomical landmarks that we are going to be using throughout the semester. Let's talk about some terminology that we are going to use throughout the semester in order for us to better understand the positions of organs relative to one another. This is the terminology used by anatomy individuals, anatomists, physiologists, medical doctors, nurses to communicate with each other where organs and body components are that they are talking about. This is often referred to as relative terminology because we are describing organs relative to each other. So organs, components in relation to one another. So for example, superior and inferior go hand in hand. So here in parentheses, cranial, it sort of means superior, not exactly, but cranial is reserved more for neuroanatomy. If we look at inferior in parentheses, you see caudal. Caudal sort of means inferior, not exactly, but caudal is mainly reserved for neuroanatomy, meaning the nervous system. Superior means that the organ we are looking at is closer or towards the head. Inferior means that the organ that we are referring to is towards or closer towards the feet. So for example, if we examine the head versus the abdomen is down here. Where is the head in respect to the abdomen? Well, generically we would say the head is above the abdomen. But if you want to put that in anatomical terminology, you would say the head is superior to the abdomen. In other words, the head is closer to the head. Of course, you can't get any closer to the head than the head itself. What about the other way around? What if we were to say, what is the abdomen to the head? That's right. In that case, you would use inferior. The abdomen is inferior to the head, meaning the abdomen is closer to the feet compared or relative to the head. Another example shown here, we are looking at the navel or belly button compared to the chin. So generically we would say our belly button is closer to the feet, or the belly button is below the chin. Anatomically, you would say the belly button is inferior to the chin because the belly button is down here. So inferior to the chin, below the chin. The next two that go hand in hand, anterior versus posterior. Anterior means closer to the front. Posterior means closer or towards the back. In a similar fashion to cranial and caudal, here in parentheses, ventral and dorsal. Ventral and anterior sort of mean the same, but in this class we'll say they are. Dorsal and posterior in a similar fashion sort of mean the same, but in this class we will say they are. So anterior or ventral means towards the front. Posterior or dorsal means towards the back. So an example of that, let's say the sternum or the breastbone relative to our spine. The breastbone is in the front, the spine is in the back. So our breastbone is anterior to the spine. That means our breastbone is in front of the spine. If we use posterior, the heart is posterior to the breastbone. So remember, the breastbone, also known as the sternum, is here, and the heart is further into the body. So the heart is posterior to the breastbone. In other words, the heart is behind the sternum. You get the idea. Relative terminology, directional terminology. This is terminology that we use to help us describe the positions of organs relative to one another. Medial versus lateral. Before I explain medial versus lateral, let's envision that we have a line going from the top of our head all the way to the bottom of our feet, right down the middle of the body. So right down the middle of the body, we have this line. This line, shown here in a dark line, or thin line, is referred to as the midline of the body. So if the organ or structure that we are looking at is close to that midline, we are going to say medial. If the organ or structure that we are looking at is further away from the midline, then we are going to say lateral. For example, heart relative to the arm. The heart is medial to the arm. What does that mean? That's right. That means that the heart is closer to the midline relative to the arm. The arm, if we look down here, the arms are lateral to the chest. So the chest is here, the arms are there. So the arms are lateral. In other words, the arms are further away from the midline compared to the chest. Proximal versus distal. Proximal versus distal is reserved for comparing, or when we are looking at body structures or components that are found on the appendages, meaning upper and lower appendages. Proximal means close to the origin of the body part. In other words, closer to the, if we are looking at components in the upper limb, the origin of the upper limb is the shoulder. In other words, where the limb attaches to the body. The origin for the lower limb is the pelvis. So we are comparing how far or how close is a body component to either the shoulder, within the arm, within the upper appendage, or to further or closer to the pelvis if we're talking about the lower appendage. So proximal means close to. If we're talking about the upper appendage, close to the shoulder. If we're talking about the lower appendage, close to the pelvis. Distal means further away. So if the structure is, for example, further away from the shoulder in the upper appendage, we would say distal. Further away from the pelvis, such as the foot, that would be distal. Let's talk about some examples. So for example, the elbow versus the wrist. The elbow is here, the wrist is there. Which of these two is closer to the attachment point, the shoulder? That's right, the elbow. So we could say the elbow is proximal to the wrist. In other words, the elbow is closer to the shoulder compared to the wrist. If we were to say it the other way around, what is the wrist to the elbow? The wrist would be distal to the elbow, meaning the wrist is further away to the attachment point, the shoulder, compared to the elbow. If we look at the lower appendage, the knee is distal to the thigh. That means that the knee is further away from the pelvis compared to the thigh, which makes sense. The knee is down here, the thigh is right there. So the knee is further away from the attachment point, the pelvis, compared to the thigh. Superficial versus deep. Superficial means towards the body surface. Deep means away from the body surface. In other words, more inside or internal. Another way of saying superficial is external. Another way of saying deep is internal. So for example, the skin is superficial to skeletal muscle. We are saying that the skin is closer to the surface of the body compared to the skeletal muscle. If we use the word deep, the lungs are deep to the skin. So the lungs are more internal compared to the skin. Then we have ipsilateral versus contralateral. Now remember that midline that we talked about in this slide over here, this line, the midline. If we draw that midline again, right down the middle, not exactly down the middle, it's a little hard. But to the left of this midline, we're going to say this is the left side of the body, and to the right of the midline, we're going to say that's the right side of the body. Now you're probably saying, Tony, that's not your left or the right. You got them backwards. Well, when left versus right, it's never about your left or right. Left versus right is all about the patient's left or right, or the figure or the model's left or right that we're looking at. Whatever we're looking at, it's their left, their right. So in this case, this is the left side, this is the right side, all based on to the left or the right side of the midline. Now, ipsilateral means that the structures that we are looking at are both on the same side, both either on the left or both either on the right. So in this case, the right hand and the right foot, because they're both on the same side, they are ipsilateral to each other. On the other hand, contralateral means opposite sides. In other words, in this case, we have the right hand located on the right side, and we have the left foot located on the left side. So the right hand and the left foot are contralateral to each other because they are on opposite sides of the midline. And that is how we use directional terminology or relative terminology. This is the terminology that I want you to get used to, because as we explore anatomy, positions of organs relative to one another, we are going to be using this terminology, and I expect you to use this terminology. The body itself, when we are viewing it, can be divided or cut into three major sections: sagittal, transverse, and frontal. Let's take a look at a picture. Transverse, shown here. When you cut the body in a transverse plane, we create a component that is a superior component and an inferior component. In other words, a transverse plane separates the body into a superior and inferior component. And when we look at the body in a transverse plane, this is what it looks like. A frontal plane, we separate the body into anterior versus posterior, front versus back. So a frontal plane cuts the body into a front component and a back component. And when we look at the body in a frontal plane, It looks like this. Sagittal plane, shown here. A sagittal plane creates or separates the body into a left versus a right side. And when we cut the body in a sagittal plane, this is what it looks like. Now, in respect to sagittal, sagittal is divided into mid-sagittal versus para-sagittal. Mid-sagittal is if the sagittal cut is exactly down the midline. Then that is going to be said mid-sagittal. And I want you to call it mid-sagittal, not just sagittal. Anything that is cut right down the midline, mid-sagittal. If a part of the body is cut in the sagittal plane, such as, for example, this way right down the shoulder, this is still sagittal, but because it's not exactly down the midline, we don't call it mid-sagittal, we call it para-sagittal. For parasagittal sections, you could simply call them sagittal if you want. The more correct way is parasagittal. But for sure, if it's right down the midline, in other words, down the middle of the body, we must say mid-sagittal. Many of you are asking why. Well, the mid-sagittal plane is a special plane. Our body exhibits what is known as bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry means whatever we have on the left, we have on the right. So the body exhibits bilateral symmetry, meaning whatever we have on the left side of the body, we also have on the right, in the most part. So we have an eye on the left, therefore we got an eye on the right. So our body exhibits bilateral symmetry across the mid-sagittal plane. That is the only plane that exhibits bilateral symmetry, meaning whatever's on one side, we find it on the opposite side. Transverse plane. There's no such thing as mid-transverse because we don't exhibit bilateral symmetry across the transverse plane, meaning whatever's on one side, we find on the opposite side. Well, we have the head at the top, but we don't have the head at the top. We got feet at the bottom. So we have the head on one side, but feet on the opposite side. So there is no bilateral symmetry across the transverse plane. Okay, let's take a look at how the body is organized internally. Internally, the body contains hollow regions or hollow spaces. These hollow spaces inside of the body are known as body cavities. We have two major body cavities, the dorsal body cavity and the ventral body cavity. Anyone remember what dorsal means? That's right, dorsal means towards the back. So shown here in yellow, this is known as the dorsal body cavity. The dorsal body cavity itself is subdivided into very specific cavities or very specific hollow regions or areas. The dorsal body cavity contains this hollow space in our head known as the cranial cavity. By the way, anyone know which organ we find in the cranial cavity? That's right, the brain. The dorsal body cavity also contains this cavity known as the vertebral cavity. And the vertebral cavity contains the spinal cord. So individually, we have the cranial cavity and we have the vertebral cavity, spinal cavity, previous name. Collectively, together as a unit, we call these two cavities the dorsal body cavity because they are found in the back. In a similar fashion, we have the ventral body cavity shown here in this sort of maroon color, meaning the hollow spaces in the anterior or front or ventral side of the body. So just like the dorsal body cavity is further divided into cranial and vertebral cavity, the ventral body cavity is also divided into subdivisions. The first subdivision are the cavities that are found in the chest. All of the cavities found in the chest collectively as a subunit known as thoracic cavity. All of the cavities found below the chest or inferior to the chest. In fact, there is a muscle here known as the diaphragm. Is one of our primary breathing or respiratory muscles that we will talk about in the respiratory system. Superior to the diaphragm, let's begin using our terminology. Superior to the diaphragm, what does that mean? That's right, above the diaphragm. Above the diaphragm, all of these cavities together, thoracic cavity. Inferior to the diaphragm, meaning below the diaphragm, all of these cavities, collectively known as the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now, individually, the thoracic cavity contains the pleural cavity. We have two of them, a left pleural cavity and a right pleural cavity. And in between these two pleural cavities, we have a pericardial cavity. Anyone know which organ is found in each of the two pleural cavities? That's right, the lungs. What about the pericardial cavity? What organ is found in there? That's right, the heart. Let's take a look at the abdominal pelvic cavity. The abdominal pelvic cavity contains two cavities. The abdominal cavity, which is this large one, mainly found in the abdomen, and the pelvic cavity, which is found within the pelvis. What organs do we mainly find in the abdominal cavity? That's right, mainly digestive organs. What about the pelvic cavity? Well, reproductive organs, but we also find urinary organs such as the bladder. We also have reproductive organs, which I just mentioned, but we also have digestive organs such as the rectum and the anus. So body cavities, their main function is to accommodate organs. If we did not have these hollow spaces inside of our bodies, we would not be able to place organs inside of the body. These body cavities are lined or contain membranes known as serous membranes. You can think of these membranes as balloons that are inside, which line is meaning the inside cover. I don't know, cover refers to outside, but the inside membrane. We have three major serous membranes. The serous membranes that are found in each of the two pleural cavities are known as the pleural serous membranes or the pleural serosa. The serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity, known as the peritoneum. And the serous membrane that lines the pericardial cavity, that is known as the pericardium. So we have three serous membranes, the pleural serosa, the peritoneum serosa, and the pericardium serosa or serous membranes. The function of these membranes is to protect the organs that are found inside of their respective cavities. So for example, the lungs are protected by the pleural serosa or serous membrane. The heart is protected by the pericardium. And visceral organs, in other words, organs such as digestive organs, are protected by the serous membrane peritoneum. Before I explain how the serous membranes protect organs, let's take a look of how the serous membrane is organized. Think of a serous membrane as a balloon. Of course, the balloon has a rubber layer. A serous membrane protects organs as if, in this case, we're going to use a fist and a balloon as an analogy. If you push your fist through a balloon, the outside rubber now hugs the hand itself. In other words, the organ is now found inside of the serous membrane, and therefore the serous membrane isolates the organ and keeps it protected. This outside rubber becomes the inside rubber that is hugging the fist or hugs the organ. This rubber component of the balloon is a layer. So we have two layers, the outside rubber, the outside layer, and the inside layer. The outside layer has a name. This is known as the parietal layer. The inside layer, or the layer that is deep to the parietal, is known as the visceral layer. So the outside superficial layer, parietal layer, the deeper layer, the visceral layer. Of course, in between the two layers, we have air. But when we are looking at actual serous membranes, this middle compartment is not filled with air. It's actually filled with a fluid. We'll talk more about this fluid here in a moment. Now, if I were to say parietal layer, you would probably ask me which parietal layer of which serous membrane are you referring to? Well, parietal versus visceral, depending on the serous membrane that we are looking at, we're going to simply add the name of the serous membrane. So if we are referring to the parietal layer of the pleural serosa, we would say, so if you want to refer to the deep layer of a serous membrane, we're going to say visceral. But we're going to add the name of the serous membrane that we are talking about. So for example, what is the name of the most superficial layer of the serous membrane that contains the lungs? The serous membrane that contains the lungs is the pleural serosa. The outermost layer would therefore be the parietal pleural plural because we're talking about the plural serosa. The deepest layer of the serous membrane that contains the lungs would be the visceral plural. So first you have the layer followed by the name of the serous membrane. So let's say we're talking about the superficial layer of the serous membrane that contains the heart. What layer will that be? So we begin with the word parietal because it's the superficial layer. The name of the serous membrane that contains the heart is the pericardium. Therefore, put it together, it is the parietal pericardium. What about the deepest layer of the serous membrane that contains the stomach? Well, the stomach is found in the abdominal cavity. The name of the serous membrane in the abdominal cavity is the peritoneum. Therefore, the deepest layer of the serous membrane that contains the stomach would be parietal peritoneum. So throughout this course, if you noticed, I will show you how names come together. Rather than memorizing the name of this is that, the name of that is this, I like to use more of a critical thinking approach when it comes to names. We're going to use a critical thinking approach where we will learn why the names are what they are. And when you know this, you don't have to memorize a whole lot. There's a little bit of stuff you still got to memorize, but it's all about putting it together. So for example, if you want to know the names of all the layers of the various serous membranes, remember the rule of thumb is layer plus the name of the serous membrane. Of course, you got to memorize that the outermost layer is called parietal, the deepest layer is visceral, and you got to memorize the names of the three serous membranes. But then you just simply put it together. So if I were to say parietal plural, what layer is that? That's right, it is the most superficial layer of the plural serosa or serous membrane. In a similar fashion, the space full of air, which we have mentioned that it's actually full of a fluid, that space is called a cavity. When we name cavities, we say the name of the membrane first, followed by the word cavity. So what is the name of the space in between the parietal and visceral layer of the plural serosa? That would be the pleural cavity. You get the idea. Inside of this cavity, the space in between the parietal and visceral layers of a serous membrane, we have a lubricating fluid. This lubricant is known as serous fluid. The serous fluid allows the visceral and the parietal layers to sort of slip and slide across each other. By doing this, it's going to reduce friction of neighboring organs. So if we come back over here, here we have the lung, here we have the heart. As you move around, envision the heart and the lung rubbing against each other. Without our serous membranes, the heart and the lung, as we run, we walk, we do cartwheels, as they rub against each other, that friction begins to wear and tear the tissues of the organ. Therefore, the organs become damaged. In order to protect the organs as they slide across each other when we move around, this lubricant or serous fluid allows the membranes to slip and slide, reduces friction, reduces wear and tear, protects the organ. Another way in which the serous membrane protects the organs is because it isolates organs from one another. Therefore, if one organ becomes infected, it helps to reduce the spreading of that infection to another organ. So serous membranes are designed to protect organs that are found inside of these serous membranes in a similar fashion to pushing your fist into a balloon. Pretty cool, right? So for example, here we have the lungs that are pushed into the pleural membrane, outermost layer, parietal pleural. Deepest layer shown here, this dark line, a little hard to see, visceral pleural. And the space in between shown as a lighter color, this is the pleural cavity. So the lungs are protected by the serous membranes, the pleural serosa. Here we see the heart, protected by the pericardium, the most superficial layer, parietal pericardium. Deepest layer here, visceral pericardium. And the space in between the two layers, the pericardial cavity. And of course, the peritoneum. Here we are looking at a transverse section through the abdomen. We have liver, stomach, kidneys. Here we have the outermost layer of the peritoneum, which if we follow it becomes the deep layer here, which hugs the organs. So the outermost layer, in this case, is going to be the parietal peritoneum. The deepest layer, shown there, is going to be the visceral peritoneum. And of course, the space in between, the peritoneal cavity, which of course contains serous fluid. Okay, a couple more slides, then we're done. In respect to the abdomen, because there are a lot of organs within the abdomen is divided into two different ways. One way in which the abdomen is divided is known as abdominal regions, tic-tac-toe. And the other way is known as quadrants. Quadra means four. Therefore, four components. Let's begin with abdominal regions. Most of these actually make sense if we break the names down. So for example, by the umbilical cord, the belly button, the umbilical region. Epi means above. Gastric refers to stomach. So above the stomach, epigastric. Hypo, below the stomach, hypogastric. Lumbar, which is one of those surface anatomy terms that I want you to remember. Lumbar is down here. On the left side, left lumbar region. On the right side, right lumbar region. Chondro refers to cartilage. And as we'll see later on, we have a lot of cartilage in that area due to the connecting of the ribs to the sternum. So on the left side, left hypochondriac, on the right side, right hypochondriac. And the lower areas of the abdominal regions. This is the iliac region, therefore left iliac, and on the right side, right iliac. So most of these make sense. They may not make sense to you right now. That's because you don't have those major anatomical regions memorized yet. So make sure you memorize those major anatomical regions or landmarks that we talked about early on in this lecture. The other way of dividing the abdomen is quadrants. This one's a lot simpler. Upper left quadrant. Upper right, right upper quadrant. Lower left, left lower quadrant. And the last one, take a deep breath, we're almost done. And the last one, the right lower quadrant. I have friends, when I was going through grad school, they were going through med school, and we've kept in contact, and they tell me that their preferred method of talking about organs within the abdomen is abdominal quadrants. Makes sense, it's a little bit simpler. But nevertheless, the abdomen is divided into quadrants or regions. Quadrants or regions are used by medical doctors to help describe where the patient, for example, may be experiencing pain. You're not going to say, well, 2 fingers to the left of the belly button and 5 fingers above. No, we'll just say it's in the left hypochondriac region. And that'll do it for today. We will see you soon. In the meantime, stay safe and have a good day. Bye-bye.